and we are here for you to provide some guidance, some light, some information so that you can understand what's happening in the world as it pertains to your rental property. So, all right, so today is, as we talked about, top 3 landlord lease writing mistakes. The first one is, go ahead.
Working with an obsolete or an antiquated lease.
The second one is?
Failing to strategically identify the lessees on your contract.
And we're going to tell you what that means in a minute, because that's very vague.
Yes.
And allowing everything at the property to be warranted. And Mike's going to talk a lot about this. He's got a ton of experience around it. So that's going to, you definitely want to pay attention to point 3. If you want to get anything out of this, point 3 is huge. All right.
And I'm going to say we're assuming that you've covered the basics in today's training, right? We covered security deposits in depth last week. If anyone wants a link to see last week's training, you can hit us up in the chat and the email. Jenny will send it to you.
We're talking applications the week before, right?
And applications the week before. So we're assuming you've covered the basics. So we're getting a little more nitty gritty, assuming you've got the basic building blocks of your lease writing process down. These are going to be the top mistakes that we see people knowing that they have no idea they're making, but they have a real consequence in real life when you write them this way. So here's the consequences: unnecessary risk to you as the landlord.
That seems like that was a consequence from last week's.
Yeah.
So everything we're talking, there is a lot of unnecessary risk. This is going to be the theme throughout a lot of this education. Unnecessary risk, unmanageable lease, also discussed last week, because this is true. If you make a mistake, you're going to see these same consequences show up over and over again. And the last one is financial exposure. And we all know what that means. That means legal, that means coming out of pocket for things, to fix things, to remedy situations that you otherwise might not have been prepared for. So the solution is to know your plan. Create a strategic approach to lease writing that ensures compliance and mitigates unknown risk. How do you do that?
So these are fancy ways of just saying, basically know what you're writing. And that's what we're going to talk about is sort of the strategy behind when you're drafting your lease. Slowing down and taking a moment to think through with these terms that you're writing, how this might play out.
Right.
In a worst case scenario. So number 1, using an obsolete or antiquated contract. So we found in our 15 years in business, there are lots of independent landlords who are working from a lease that they maybe Googled, maybe got from a friend, maybe they pulled it from another state, or maybe it was from a legitimate source, but it's from like 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago. In all of these cases, you would be using an obsolete or antiquated contract.
Yeah, I've got a story about that. So I pulled a lease earlier this year from a prospective client who had been working with a property management company for a long time. Her parent family actually owned these properties, and they had written these leases, and the leases weren't updated going back to like the late 90s. And a lot of these tenants had been there for, over 20 years at these properties, and they were still on the same lease. Our leases nowadays are almost
Like 70, 80 pages.
Yeah, well, that's
because of the hazard.
The hazard disclosure, but the basic nuts and bolts of our leases are usually about 10 to 14 pages long, with all the new addenda that's been supplied. The car lease itself is 8 or 9 pages long. So these leases, just in comparison, were 1-pagers. They're 1-page leases, and you can imagine how much detail was left out of them as a result. So what you want to do is you want to know the source of the contract. Is this something you pulled together off the internet, or did you use a reliable source like California Apartment Association, CAR, or another legitimate entity? Yeah. So if an attorney, a local real estate attorney who does business as a real estate attorney representing landlords and tenants, is going to know how to write a good lease. And if that's someone that you're going to lean on to write your lease versus these other, like California Apartment Association or California Association of Realtors, that's a good source.
But that's probably not a good use of your money. The money it's going to cost you to pay an attorney, that, I don't know, I would say that doesn't necessarily make sense. And I wouldn't say we see most people doing that.
No.
Most people are Googling a lease and grabbing them from some generic source online. Or what we commonly see is clients that are like, my attorney reviewed it, or I'm an attorney, but you're not specifically a real estate landlord tenant attorney in California. And there's a big difference between those
Absolutely, yeah. So if you have an attorney write the lease, which is fine, again, you might know a guy or have a friend or a family relative or someone who wants to help you out, that's great. If they're a landlord tenant attorney, even better. If they're not, you definitely want to second guess that lease and you probably want to have someone who knows what they're talking about doing.
Yeah,
So we
basically-
definitely recommend, if you're not a member, join the California Apartment Association, because they do have a lease there that's accurate.
It's accurate, but theirs is written for apartments,
Right.
which is, I mean, we use the CAR, California Association of Realtors. If you work with a realtor, they'll be using that. That said, a lot of realtors don't handle leases, and we're probably, I think we're possibly the only management company in Marin who are also realtors. So a lot of management companies in Marin are using True Farms, Professional Publishing, which is not quite as comprehensive. What's the other? There's a couple other big ones, but basically don't overcomplicate this for yourself. Just Google, find a source of one of the legitimate sources that sells leases and buy that. Don't try to piecemeal it together yourself. And if you write your own addendum, have a real estate attorney review your addendum that you've written with all your custom terms, because we also find out a lot of landlords are throwing in terms that are not legal.
But Darcy, what if I'm using the lease that my agent wrote for me last year?
It's probably out of date. The car lease is updated annually, if not more than that. And
It's
if
been updated like 3 times
this year, well, yeah, when you have new legislation passing, then everything gets changed right away. So you must always be using the most up-to-date lease. Like a real life example is recently in Marin, we've had ordinances passed where we have the flood. That one was maybe
bed bugs.
We've got the garage door opener term. The battery and the thing. There's all kinds of new little bits of legislation that are passed that are not as big as all this COVID stuff. But if you're out of compliance, and heaven forbid there's an accident and you weren't in compliance and you didn't give your tenant the right notification about that, guess who's liable?
But the other thing about these addenda that are in the contract, for example, the bed bug addendum and the flood hazard addendum, is it also places some of that onus back on the tenant. For example, if your property doesn't have bed bugs when the tenants move in and the tenants bring bed bugs into your property, the bed bug addendum tells the tenants, hey, you brought the bed bugs into this house. It is your responsibility to remedy the situation. So that's not an insignificant cost, and it has lots of repercussions. So you want to make sure that someone is going to be taking care of that on your behalf. Same thing with the flood hazards. If you tell the tenant, hey, just so you know, my property is located in a flood zone. You need to be aware of that when you get your renter's insurance or anything else. You click that box, it puts the onus of the tenant knowing that they're taking that risk of living in that area at that time. Mm-hmm. So you want to just make sure that they know that.
Another good example is the mold addendum. So the mold addendum, contrary to what a lot of tenants think when they first read it, is, oh, there's mold in this property. No, that's not what it says. It says you are acknowledging that you play a part in the role of preventing mold from growing by doing things like venting your shower and windows, opening your windows, and reporting when you see growth. Because if the tenant doesn't do that stuff and then mold grows, well, guess what? You can put some of that blame on the tenant, and they're acknowledging that if they haven't done these things.
More to the point, reporting leaks that you can see. Yeah. So if there's a leak at the property, and we use this example a number of times, but there was a property that we represented in San Rafael. There was a leak under the sink. The tenant knew about it. It was very visible. They didn't report it. Caused a huge
$20,000
with water damage, black mold, all that stuff.
Black mold.
And because the owner had this mold addendum, were they able to go after them? You were involved in that property.
We were not managing that one, so I don't recall.
But there was a mold addendum in place, so they gave the owner some more protection as a result of this. So you want to make sure you have these in there. They're really for your protection at the end of the day. And disclose, right?
Right. So there's a lot more about the addendums that we could go into. We will be doing more in-depth trainings on this. For today, we just want you to take away, make sure you're using a 2020 lease.
Yeah, absolutely. In the meantime, thank you so much for showing up today. We really appreciate it. Stay safe out there. Be positive and test negative. Take care, everybody.
See you next time.